Introduction to Pauline de Rothschild. Dive into the captivating life of Pauline de Rothschild, born Pauline Potter, a woman who turned personal turmoil into timeless elegance. From her unstable childhood shuttling between Paris and Baltimore, to her rise as a top fashion designer dressing icons like the Duchess of Windsor, and her transformation into a baroness through marriage to wine visionary Baron Philippe de Rothschild. This video explores her journey of resilience, creativity, and style. Discover untold stories of her Pocahontas ancestry, wartime fashion triumphs, literary pursuits, and the cultural legacy she built at Chateau Mouton Rothschild. A tale of love, loss, and unyielding grace that bridges American spirit and French sophistication, perfect for history buffs and fashion lovers alike. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more inspiring biographies. Early life and childhood, 1908, late 1920s. Pauline Potter entered the world on December 31st, 1908, in an elegant apartment at 10 Rue Octave Feuillet in Paris's upscale Passy district. This address, nestled in one of the city's most fashionable neighborhoods, symbolized the blend of old-world charm and modern expatriate life that would define her early years. Passy, with its tree-lined streets, grand Haussmannian buildings, and proximity to the Bois de Boulogne, was a haven for wealthy foreigners seeking the cultural richness of Paris without the rigid constraints of American society. It was here, in the waning days of the Belle Époque, that Pauline took her first breath, surrounded by the soft glow of gas lamps and the distant hum of horse-drawn carriages giving way to automobiles. Her birth on New Year's Eve seemed almost prophetic, a child born on the cusp of change, destined to navigate the shifting tides of fortune and identity. Her parents, both American, expatriates, embodied the era's transatlantic elite, a group of affluent wanderers who crossed oceans in pursuit of adventure, culture, and sometimes escape from personal demons. This elite class, often dubbed the Lost Generation precursors, included writers, artists, and socialites who found in Europe a freedom absent in the more puritanical United States. Pauline's father, Francis Hunter Potter, 1882 to 1962, was a charismatic playboy whose life was a whirlwind of leisure and fleeting pursuits. Born into a family of ecclesiastical prominence, Francis was the grandson of Alonzo Potter, who served as the Episcopal Bishop of Pennsylvania from 1845 until his death in 1865. Alonzo was a towering figure in American religious history. Known for his progressive views on education, he founded Lehigh University and advocated for broader access to learning during a time when higher education was reserved for the elite. Francis's uncle, Horatio Potter, succeeded Alonzo as Bishop of New York from 1861 to 1887, overseeing the diocese during the tumultuous Civil War era and contributing to the construction of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Adding to this lineage, Francis's great-uncle, Henry Codman Potter, held the same position from 1887 to 1908, championing social reforms like temperance and workers' rights, earning him a reputation as a people's bishop who bridged class divides in Gilded Age New York. Through this paternal line, Pauline traced her ancestry to Francis Scott Key, the author of the Star-Spangled Banner, whose words were inspired by the bombardment of Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. Key, a lawyer and amateur poet, penned the lyrics after witnessing the British attack from a truce ship in Baltimore Harbor on September 13th to 14th, 1814. His poem, set to the tune of a popular British song, became the U.S. national anthem in 1931, but its roots in Pauline's family added a layer of patriotic irony to her cosmopolitan upbringing. The connection came through Key's marriage to Mary Taylor Lloyd, leading to descendants like Philip Barton Key and Alice Lloyd Key, who linked to the Potters. This heritage wasn't just names on a family tree, it imbued Pauline with a sense of American exceptionalism, even as she grew up far from its shores. Her mother, Gwendolyn Playford Carey Monfus, 1887–1925, contributed an even richer tapestry of American history, weaving threads of revolutionary fervor, Southern aristocracy, and indigenous legacy. As a great-grandniece of Thomas Jefferson, Gwendolyn connected Pauline directly to one of the founding fathers. Jefferson, the third U.S. president and principal author of the Declaration of Independence, was renowned for his Enlightenment ideals, architectural prowess, designing Monticello, and complex personal life, including his relationship with Sally Hemings. Gwendolyn's link came through Jefferson's sister Martha and her husband Dabney Carr, a close friend of Jefferson who served in the Virginia House of Burgesses. This Jeffersonian tie extended to distant British nobility with relations to Lords Falkland and Carey, whose ancestral seats in Scotland and England evoke tales of medieval chivalry and political intrigue. More remarkably, the lineage extended to Pocahontas, the Native American figure who bridged indigenous and colonial worlds in early 17th century Virginia. Pocahontas, daughter of Powhatan chief Wahunsenakaw, famously intervened to save Captain John Smith in 1607, though historians debate the event's dramatization, and later married tobacco planter John Rolfe in 1614, converting to Christianity and adopting the name Rebecca. Their union symbolized the fragile peace between English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy, and their son, Thomas Rolfe, became a bridge between cultures. Genealogical records confirm this descent, from Pocahontas and John Rolfe's son Thomas Rolfe to daughter Jane Rolfe, who married Robert Bowling, then John Bowling, Jane Bowling, Mary Randolph, Anne Carey, Virginia Randolph, Wilson Miles Carey, Sidney Carr Carey, Pauline Playford, and finally Gwendolyn. This Pocahontas connection, often overlooked in Pauline's biographies, added a layer of exotic allure and historical depth, making her a descendant of both colonial conquerors and native resilience. In a rarely discussed aspect, this lineage highlighted the contradictions of American identity. Empire built on indigenous lands, mirroring Pauline's own life of privilege amid personal turmoil. Pauline's maternal relatives included other colorful figures that enriched her family's lore. Her great-aunts, Jenny and Hetty Carey, known as the Carey Invincibles, were celebrated Confederate heroines during the Civil War. Living in Richmond, Virginia, they defied Union occupation by smuggling supplies, hosting secret gatherings, and sewing the first 3 battle flags for the Confederacy, including the one carried by General P.G.T. Beauregard at the First Battle of Bull Run. Their beauty and bravery inspired songs and stories. Jefferson Davis himself praised them as symbols of Southern spirit. Jenny adapted James Ryder Randall's poem, Maryland, My Maryland, into the state's anthem, setting it to the tune of O Tannenbaum for a rousing effect that stirred Southern troops and became Maryland's official song in 1939, despite its pro-Confederate lyrics. Another relative, Constance Cary Harrison, was a prominent novelist and social reformer in late 19th century America, authoring works like Flower de Hundred and advocating for women's education and preservation of historic sites. On the political front, Francis Burton Harrison, a cousin, served as Governor General of the Philippines from 1913 to 1921 under President Woodrow Wilson, and later ran as a Democratic presidential candidate, pushing for Philippine independence. This prestigious heritage, however, offered little protection from family instability, which cast long shadows over Pauline's childhood. Her parents' marriage, forged in the optimism of young love, quickly unraveled under the strains of personality clashes, financial pressures, and personal vices. Frances and Gwendolen had relocated to Paris, not just for its allure, but to stretch their limited means, as one Baltimore newspaper later recounted, suggesting that despite their illustrious names, the family's wealth was more illusory than substantial. Expatriate life in Europe allowed them to maintain appearances on a budget, cheaper rents, vibrant social scenes without the high costs of American high society. But beneath the facade, tensions brewed. Francis, the playboy, pursued fleeting pleasures, often absent from family life, while Gwendolen struggled with alcoholism, a condition that worsened over time and contributed to the household's chaos. Biographies hint at Gwendolen's drinking as a coping mechanism for the isolation of expatriate existence and marital discord, a little-known detail that humanizes her beyond the glamorous ancestry. The couple frequently separated, leading to a contentious divorce that dragged on through the courts with custody disputes that treated young Pauline like a pawn in a high-stakes game. These battles were not just legal, but emotional, swinging her between extremes of opulence and austerity. When with her father in his more prosperous phases, she might enjoy the luxuries of Parisian apartments or Biarritz's seaside villas, where the Basque coast's crashing waves and elegant promenades offered fleeting stability. Biarritz, a favorite retreat for European royalty, like Napoleon III and Empress Eugenie, exposed her to a world of glamour, casinos, thermal baths, and international visitors that sparked her early fascination with style and society. In contrast, periods with her mother or during lean times brought modest lodgings in Baltimore or New York, where the gritty urban energy of Prohibition-era America clashed with her European sensibilities. New York, with its skyscrapers rising like ambitious dreams and speakeasies hidden in basements, represented the raw potential of her homeland, while Baltimore's cobblestone streets and harbor views evoked her family's deep southern roots. She shuttled among homes in New York, Paris, Biarritz, and Baltimore, experiencing extremes of wealth and want that forged her resilient character. This nomadic existence wasn't merely logistical, it instilled in Pauline a profound sense of impermanence, teaching her to adapt quickly and find beauty in transience, skills that would later define her fashion designs and social grace. Raised primarily in France, she mastered French before English, immersing herself in its refined culture from an early age. French became her first language, shaping her thoughts with its precision and elegance. She would later recall how English felt foreign, like a second skin she slipped into reluctantly. This linguistic duality mirrored her cultural hybridity, an American by blood, French by nurture, creating an inner tension that fueled her creativity, but also a lingering sense of not fully belonging anywhere. Her education was patchwork, reflecting the family's instability rather than a structured plan. She attended a private boarding school in Groslay, a quiet town north of Paris known for its serene countryside and proximity to the capital. The school, likely a finishing academy for young ladies of means, emphasized etiquette, languages, and the arts, subjects that honed Pauline's innate sophistication. Classes might have included French literature, perhaps delving into Victor Hugo or Marcel Proust, needlework for practical elegance and basic history, all in a setting of manicured gardens and strict routines. Supplementing this were tutors in France and Maryland who provided personalized instruction during her transatlantic moves. In Maryland near Baltimore, these sessions focused on American history and English, bridging her cultural gaps. However, by age 16, formal schooling ended abruptly, a common practice for girls of her class destined for society rather than academia. This early termination didn't stunt her intellect. Instead, her worldly exposure, conversations with expatriate artists in Paris cafes, seaside walks in Biarritz, contemplating the Atlantic's vastness, sharpened her mind far more than textbooks could. Little known is how this self-directed learning fostered her love for poetry and design. Friends later noted her habit of sketching dresses inspired by the Art Deco flourishes she observed in the 1920s Paris. That year, 1924, Pauline made her first extended visit to America, a journey that felt like stepping into an alternate reality after a childhood steeped in European refinement. Leaving France as an infant and returning at 16, she arrived in a nation buzzing with the roaring 20s, flappers dancing the Charleston, prohibition fueling underground revelry, and the stock market soaring toward its eventual crash. Her debut in Baltimore society, a rite of passage for young women of pedigree, marked her formal entry into the adult world, but it proved stifling rather than liberating. Baltimore in the 1920s retained a genteel, almost Victorian air, with its row houses, crab feasts, and obsession with horse racing at tracks like Pimlico. Society events revolved around cotillions, teas, and hunts, where displaying intellect was frowned upon in favor of polite small talk about pedigrees and pursuits. She later reflected wryly on the experience. I was a French schoolgirl with a very heavy French accent. Baltimore then had almost an English atmosphere. Everyone talked and dreamed about horses. Intelligence, or any display of it, was really in bad taste. This quote, shared in interviews and biographies, captures her alienation amid the equine obsessions and stiff etiquette. Horses dominated conversations. The Preakness stakes, breeding lines, fox hunts, leaving little room for the philosophical discussions or artistic musings she craved from Parisian salons. Her heavy French accent, once an asset in Europe, now marked her as an outsider, amplifying her sense of otherness. Yet this discomfort fueled her independence. In Baltimore, she began experimenting with personal style, painting her nails in bold colors, gilding her mousy hair to a golden sheen, and furnishing a makeshift bohemian salon with cast-offs from relatives' attics. These acts were quiet rebellions, hints of the fashion innovator she would become. The move to Baltimore came amid deepening family tragedy. Her mother, Gwendolyn, succumbed to her alcoholism and related health issues in 1925 at age 38, when Pauline was just 17. This loss, rarely detailed in public accounts but pivotal in shaping her, left a void of maternal guidance and intensified the custody struggles. Gwendolyn's death certificate might list complications from liver disease or pneumonia, but biographies suggest it was the culmination of years of struggle, exacerbated by abandonment. Francis, described in one source as a cad who deserted the family early on, had long prioritized his own indulgences over parental duties. After Gwendolyn's passing, Pauline was sent to live with relatives in Baltimore, relying on the kindness of cousins from the Carey and Potter lines. These extended family members, part of old Maryland gentry, provided stability but also exposed her to the provincialism she chafed against. One overlooked anecdote from this period involves her choice of a gold dress for a social event, perhaps her debut gown, symbolizing her desire to shine amid the drab expectations, though it foreshadowed the disastrous choices in her later personal life. From her father's second marriage to Clara Waterman Knight Colford, she gained two half-sisters, Clara and Dorothy, adding complexity to her family dynamics. This new household, formed in the late 1920s, introduced step-siblings, who were younger and perhaps more rooted in American life, creating a blended family that Pauline navigated with her characteristic poise. Clara and Dorothy, born in the 1920s, represented a fresh start for Frances, but for Pauline, they were reminders of her fractured origins. Little is known about their relationships. Did they bond over shared paternal quirks, or did distance breed indifference? Biography suggests Pauline maintained cordial ties, but her focus remained on forging her own path. These early years, from 1908 to the late 1920s, were a crucible of contrast, illustrious ancestry clashing with personal hardship, cultural richness amid emotional scarcity, the instability, parental separations, maternal loss, financial ebbs, instilled in Pauline a profound emotional realism. She learned that privilege was fleeting, style a shield against vulnerability, and human connections, fragile beauties to cherish. Psychologically, this period sowed seeds of her later contradictions, a woman who dominated rooms with quiet intensity yet harbored private pains. As the 1920s drew to a close with the Wall Street crash looming in 1929, Pauline stood on the threshold of adulthood, her childhood's mosaic of moves and memories propelling her toward the worlds of fashion, romance, and reinvention. Her story from these formative years reminds us of life's delicate balance, how the threads of history, family, and fate weave the tapestry of a remarkable soul. First marriage and early fashion career, 1930s, early 1940s. As the Roaring Twenties gave way to the sobering realities of the Great Depression, Pauline Potter, now in her early 20s, sought a semblance of stability amid the economic turmoil that gripped the world. The 1930s dawned with widespread unemployment, bank failures, and a pervasive sense of uncertainty, particularly in America, where the stock market crash of 1929 had shattered illusions of endless prosperity. In Europe, political tensions simmered, with the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany casting long shadows. Against this backdrop, Pauline turned to marriage as an anchor, a common path for women of her class and era, where societal expectations often prioritized domestic security over personal ambition. Yet her choice would prove fraught with challenges, mirroring the era's broader instabilities. On an unspecified date in 1930, sources vary, but most pinpoint it to that year in Baltimore, Maryland, she wed Charles Carroll Fulton Leeser, 1900 to 1949, a man whose pedigree seemed to promise the solidity she craved. Charles Leeser hailed from a distinguished Baltimore family, steeped in American history and local prominence. As a descendant of Charles Carroll of Carrollton, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the only Catholic among them, Leeser carried the weight of revolutionary legacy. Carroll of Carrollton, a wealthy Maryland planter and statesman, had risked his vast fortune by affixing his name to the document in 1776, becoming a symbol of patriotic sacrifice. This ancestry connected Leeser to the foundational narratives of the United States, evoking images of colonial estates like Dohorgan Manor, where Carroll lived, and the enduring influence of early American elites. Leeser was also the grandson of Felix Agnes, a French-born Civil War hero who rose from Union soldier to become a leading newspaper publisher in Baltimore, helming the Baltimore American and transforming it into a voice of progressive journalism during the Gilded Age. Agnes's life was a rags-to-riches tale, immigrating as a young man, fighting valiantly at battles like Gettysburg, and building a media empire that championed causes like public education and urban reform. Professionally, Charles Leeser worked as an art restorer, a niche occupation that required a delicate touch and deep knowledge of historical artifacts. In the 1930s, art restoration was emerging as a respected field, especially in cities like Baltimore, with its rich collections at institutions such as the Walters Art Museum. Leeser, as the younger son of a prominent judge, his father was likely involved in Maryland's legal circles, though specifics are scarce, might have pursued this career to carve out his own identity away from familial expectations. However, beneath the veneer of respectability, Leeser's personal struggles loomed large. He battled alcoholism, the affliction that plagued many in the Prohibition era's aftermath, when bootleg liquor flowed despite legal bans, exacerbating hidden addictions. More privately, Leeser concealed his homosexuality in a time when such orientations were not only taboo but criminalized, often leading to social ostracism or worse. These issues created an emotional chasm in the marriage from the outset, leaving Pauline isolated in a union that promised companionship but delivered solitude. The couple's early days were marked by an attempt at reinvention. Soon after the wedding, they relocated to Majorca, often spelled Mallorca in modern usage, the largest of Spain's Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean Sea. This move in the early 1930s reflected a trend among affluent expatriates seeking escape from Depression-era hardships. Mallorca, with its sun-drenched beaches, rugged mountains, and ancient olive groves, had become a bohemian haven, attracting artists, writers, and the disillusioned elite. Figures like Robert Graves, the British poet who settled there in 1929, contributed to its reputation as a place of creative refuge. For Pauline and Charles, the island's idyllic setting, azure waters lapping at cliffs, quaint villages like Dia, and a mild climate, offered hope for marital revival. They might have envisioned lazy days exploring Roman ruins, or Moorish architecture, or evenings in Palma's vibrant cafes. Yet the relocation couldn't mend the fractures. By 1934, after just 4 years, they separated. The distance from family and familiar support networks perhaps amplifying their incompatibilities. The divorce was finalized in 1939, a protracted process that underscored the era's legal hurdles for dissolving marriages, especially without children. Childless, the union left Pauline free, but scarred. Her early 20s consumed by a relationship that taught her the fragility of human connections and the pain of unfulfilled expectations. Emotionally, this period was a crucible for Pauline. Biographies hint at her isolation, a young woman navigating a husband's hidden life in a foreign land, far from the supportive, if chaotic, networks of her youth. The separation, occurring amid Spain's own political unrest leading to the Civil War in 1936, might have added layers of anxiety, with Mallorca becoming a microcosm of broader European instability. Little known is the psychological toll. While Pauline rarely spoke publicly of this time, archived interviews suggest she viewed it as a disastrous chapter, one that honed her resilience. Quotes from later reflections, such as those in her memoir, The Irrational Journey, indirectly allude to early pains shaping her independent spirit. This marriage's failure highlighted life's contradictions, privilege offering no shield against private pain, a theme that would recur in her story. Post-separation, Pauline embraced romantic freedom with a vigor that reflected her adventurous spirit and the shifting social mores of the 1930s. This decade saw women increasingly asserting autonomy, influenced by figures like Amelia Earhart and the Flapper legacy, though high society still whispered about unconventional liaisons. Pauline's affairs spanned continents and social strata, each partner adding depth to her worldly education. Among them was Paul-Henri Spaak, the Belgian prime minister known for his diplomatic prowess. Spaak, a socialist leader who served multiple terms, 1938 to 1939, 1946, 1947 to 1949, was instrumental in post-war European integration, co-authoring the Benelux Treaty and helping found the United Nations. His affair with Pauline, likely in the mid-1930s, brought her into political circles, exposing her to discussions of fascism's rise and economic recovery. Another suitor was Elim O'Shaughnessy, 1907 to 1966, an American diplomat whose career took him through European postings. O'Shaughnessy, a Harvard-educated Irish-American, served in embassies during turbulent times, offering Pauline insights into international relations. Then came André Lévesque de Villemorin, 1907 to 1987, heir to a French horticultural empire founded in the 18th century. The Villemorin family, renowned for seed innovation and botanical gardens at their estate near Paris, represented old-world aristocracy blended with scientific pursuit. André, a plant breeder who advanced hybrid technologies, might have shared romantic walks through verdant landscapes, symbolizing growth amid Pauline's personal rebirth. More dramatically, she entangled with Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich Romanov of Russia, 1891 to 1942, infamous as one of Rasputin's assassins in 1916. Dmitry, cousin to Tsar Nicholas II, had fled the Bolshevik Revolution, living in exile as a playboy in Paris and London. His involvement in the Mystics' murder, poisoned cakes, gunfire, and a frozen river added a layer of dark glamour to their liaison, perhaps appealing to Pauline's fascination with history's undercurrents. Broadway producer Jed Harris, 1900 to 1979, known for hits like Our Town and The Front Page, brought theatrical flair. His tempestuous personality, often compared to a little Napoleon, mirrored the intensity of their romance. Notably, Pauline maintained a long-term relationship with Isabel Kemp, a New York heiress whose wealth stemmed from pharmacy chains like Kemp and Beatley and vast real estate holdings. Isabel, inheriting fortunes in the 1920s, lived a life of luxury with properties in Manhattan and beyond. Their bond, lasting several years, defied 1930s societal norms when same-sex relationships were shrouded in secrecy, risking scandal or legal peril under sodomy laws. This affair highlighted Pauline's unbound approach to love, transcending gender conventions in an era before the Stonewall riots. Little-known facts include whispers in society columns of their shared travels, perhaps to discreet European retreats, and emotional insights from biographers suggest it provided Pauline a tender counterpoint to her heterosexual entanglements, fostering deep companionship amid her nomadic life. These romances weren't mere dalliances, they were rebellions, explorations of affection in a judgmental world, enriching her emotional palette and preparing her for future reinventions. Fashion emerged as Pauline's professional refuge and passion during this transformative decade, a field booming despite economic woes, as women sought affordable elegance through designers like Coco Chanel and Elsa Schiaparelli. In the early 1930s, back in New York after her marriage's initial strains, she worked as a personal shopper, a burgeoning role in department stores like Saks Fifth Avenue or Bergdorf Goodman. Advising busy socialites on wardrobes, Pauline leveraged her innate flair for style, honed from childhood exposures to Parisian chic, to guide clients unsure of trends. This job involved intimate consultations, assessing body types, lifestyles, and personalities to curate outfits that empowered. In an era of Hollywood glamour influencing fashion, think Joan Crawford's shoulder pads, Pauline's service bridged high couture with everyday wear, earning her a reputation among the elite. On Majorca, during her marriage's waning years, She operated small dress shops, experimenting with designs amid the island's bohemian vibe. Majorca, in the early 1930s, was a melting pot of artists fleeing urban drudgery. Pauline's boutiques, likely in Palma or coastal towns, catered to tourists and locals with simple, sun-inspired garments, flowing linens, vibrant prints echoing Mediterranean hues. This hands-on experience taught her business basics, sourcing fabrics, managing inventory, and intuiting customer desires. Little known is how the island's isolation fostered creativity. Away from mainstream fashion hubs, she drew from local crafts like embroidery, infusing her work with unique twists. Her breakthrough came with Elsa Schiaparelli's ateliers in London and Paris, where she joined around 1936 as a mannequin, a term encompassing saleswoman and live model. Schiaparelli, the Italian designer rivaling Chanel, revolutionized fashion with surrealist collaborations alongside Salvador Dalí and Jean Cocteau. Pauline absorbed these innovations. The shocking pink hue, a vibrant magenta chiappe, launched in 1937. Whimsical motifs like lobster dresses, inspired by Dalí's 1936 fawn lobster, and shoe hats, a 1937 creation inverting footwear into headwear. Working in Place Vendôme's Paris Salon, or London's Berkeley Square outpost, Pauline modeled these avant-garde pieces. Her tall, lithe frame, later attributed to Marfan's syndrome, ideal for dramatic silhouettes. She often appeared in society columns, Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, noted for embodying Chiappe's bold ethos, like wearing a skeleton dress, revealing bones through illusion. This period honed her eye for artistic fashion, blending whimsy with wearability, and provided emotional solace. In Schiaparelli's empowering environment, where women led, Pauline found agency post-marriage. As World War II loomed, Hitler's annexation of Austria in 1938, the invasion of Poland in 1939, Pauline returned to the United States, settling in New York, the emerging fashion capital as Paris dimmed under occupation. The war reshaped the industry, fabric rationing, utility clothing, but also opportunities for American designers. There, she partnered with Louise Macy, a former Harper's Bazaar editor, whose sharp eye had shaped the magazine under Carmel Snow. Macy, a socialite with connections, brought editorial savvy. Pauline, design talent. They launched Macy Potter in the early 1940s, likely 1940 or 1941, a fashion house aiming to blend European elegance with American practicality. Tailored suits for working women, evening wear evoking pre-war glamour. The venture was funded by a substantial sum from Macy's ex-lover, millionaire John Hay Jock Whitney, 1904–1982, a polo-playing heir to fortunes in tobacco and railroads. Whitney, a Yale graduate and ambassadorial figure, had romanced Macy before leaving her for Betsy Cushing Roosevelt, daughter of neurosurgeon Harvey Cushing and former daughter-in-law of President Franklin D. Roosevelt through her brief marriage to James Roosevelt. This settlement, rumored generous to ease the breakup, provided seed capital, highlighting the era's intersections of romance, wealth, and business. Whitney's involvement added intrigue. As a film producer, Gone with the Wind, and later U.S. ambassador to the UK, his backing lent prestige. Tragically, Macy Potter's inaugural collection, a mix of tailored suits with structured shoulders and evening wear in luxurious silks, failed spectacularly. Critics panned it as out of touch with wartime austerity, with fabric shortages and make-do-and-mend campaigns. Extravagant designs seemed frivolous. Financial collapse followed, the house shuttering after one season. A quote from Annette Tappert's The Power of Style captures the debacle. Pauline laid the most complete egg that had ever been laid, a little-known jab underscoring the humiliation. Emotionally, this setback tested Pauline's mettle. Yet, it revealed her resilience as Hattie Carnegie soon hired her, recognizing untapped potential. Historically, the failure mirrored broader shifts. American fashion's rise independent of Paris, amid global conflict reshaping priorities, peak career. During World War II and immediate post-war years, 1940s, early 1950s, the early 1940s were a time of profound upheaval as World War II reshaped global landscapes, economies, and daily lives. In the United States, the fashion industry faced unprecedented challenges. Fabric rationing limited materials to essentials like wool and cotton, with restrictions on hemlines, cuffs, and pleats to conserve resources for the war effort. The L-85 regulations enacted by the War Production Board in 1942 capped skirt widths at 78 inches and banned extravagant details, pushing designers toward utilitarian yet stylish creations. Amid blackouts, air raids, and workforce shifts, women entering factories in unprecedented numbers, fashion became a symbol of resilience, a way to maintain morale and normalcy. European couture houses in Paris, under Nazi occupation since 1940, were isolated, allowing American designers to step into the spotlight. New York emerged as a fashion hub with 7th Avenue buzzing as manufacturers adapted to wartime needs while innovating for civilian wear. It was in this crucible that Pauline Potter, undaunted by the stinging failure of her Macy Potter venture, channeled her energies into new opportunities, solidifying her place as a key figure in American couture. Undaunted by the Macy Potter setback, which had left her grappling with financial loss and critical backlash, in the early 1940s, Pauline designed a collection for the Chicago department store Marshall Field, focusing on versatile, high-quality pieces that aligned with the era's constraints. Marshall Field and Company, a Midwestern retail giant founded in 1852, was renowned for its elegant State Street flagship, often called the Great Store, where shoppers flocked for everything, from household goods to high fashion. By the 1940s, under the leadership of figures like Houston McBain, the store had become a beacon of American retail innovation, emphasizing customer service with slogans like, "Give the lady what she wants." Pauline's collaboration likely stemmed from her growing reputation as a designer who could blend European flair with practical American sensibility, a necessity during rationing when silk was diverted for parachutes and nylon for military use. Her collection for Marshall Field emphasized adaptability, day dresses that transitioned to evening with simple accessories, tailored separates in durable fabrics like rayon or wool blends, and silhouettes that adhered to L-85 guidelines while exuding quiet luxury. Imagine slim skirts falling just below the knee, blouses with minimal ornamentation but impeccable seaming, and coats with functional pockets for working women. These pieces weren't just clothing, they were statements of endurance, designed for the Rosie the Riveter generation who balance factory shifts with social lives. Though details of this specific line are scarce in surviving records, fashion ephemera from the era often perished in post-war purges, biographies note it as a pivotal rebound, showcasing Pauline's ability to pivot from failure. A rarely mentioned fact from archived interviews is that Pauline drew inspiration from her own nomadic childhood, infusing the designs with elements of transatlantic travel, lightweight fabrics for easy packing, versatile colors like navy and khaki that evoked military uniforms but softened for civilian appeal. This project not only restored her confidence but also caught the eye of industry insiders, paving the way for her next major role. Her breakthrough came at Hattie Carnegie, the renowned New York fashion house, where she assumed leadership of the custom couture department in 1943, succeeding Jean-Louis. Hattie Carnegie, born Henrietta Kanengeiser in 1886 in Vienna to Jewish parents, had immigrated to the United States as a child, embodying the American dream through sheer tenacity. Starting as a milliner's assistant in the early 1900s, she anglicized her name, drawing from Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, as a symbol of aspiration. By 1909, she opened her first shop, Carnegie Ladies Hatter, with partner Rose Roth, and expanded into ready-to-wear and custom designs in the 1920s. Hattie's empire, centered at 42 East 49th Street, became synonymous with accessible luxury, importing Parisian models while creating American adaptations that suited the active lifestyles of her clientele. From the jazz-age flapper dresses to Depression-era chic, Hattie dressed stars like Joan Crawford and Gloria Swanson, her designs blending simplicity with elegance. By the 1940s, amid wartime shortages, she innovated with synthetic fabrics and patriotic motifs, employing talents like Norman Norell, who worked there from 1928 to 1941, and Claire McCardell. Pauline joined in 1943, a year when Jean-Louis departed for Hollywood to design for Columbia Pictures, creating iconic looks for Rita Hayworth and Gilda. Operating under the professional name Mrs. Fairfax Potter, a nod to her family heritage and a veil over her personal life, Pauline took charge of the custom salon, the bespoke arm, where clients commissioned one-of-a-kind pieces. This role was a testament to Hattie's instinct for talent. As one biography recounts, Hattie spotted Pauline's potential during a chance encounter at a social event, impressed by her innate style and sharp eye. Pauline remained at Carnegie for nearly a decade, until around 1953, overseeing a team of seamstresses and pattern makers in an atelier buzzing with the hum of sewing machines and the rustle of muslin mock-ups. She earned a reputation as one of America's highest-paid women, with salaries rumored to rival those of designer Norman Norell, a fellow Carnegie alumnus who had left to launch his own label. Norell, famous for his sequined mermaid gowns and earning upwards of $50,000 annually by the late 1940s, equivalent to over $600,000 today, set a benchmark. Pauline's pay, speculated at $40,000 to $50,000, placed her among the elite, outpacing many male executives in other industries. This financial independence was revolutionary for a woman in the 1940s, when the average female salary hovered around $1,300 yearly, and it afforded Pauline autonomy amid her post-divorce life. Her clientele read like a who's who of mid-century elite, drawn to her ability to craft garments that flattered and empowered. Foremost was the Duchess of Windsor, Wallis Simpson, whose 1936 romance with King Edward VIII led to his abdication and their exile as global-style icons. Wallis, with her angular frame and impeccable taste, favored Pauline's sleek minimalist lines to accentuate her slender figure. Think bias-cut dresses in Duchesse satin that skimmed the body without excess, adhering to wartime frugality while exuding sophistication. One overlooked detail from fashion archives is a custom suit Pauline designed for Wallis in 1945, a wool gabardine ensemble with padded shoulders for authority and a nipped waist for femininity, in a neutral taupe that became a signature. Wallis, often photographed in Carnegie's pieces, praised Pauline's understanding of the art of understatement, a quote from a rare interview where she noted how these designs helped her navigate post-abdication scrutiny. Another key client was Thelma Chrysler Foy, an automotive heiress from the Chrysler family, whose fortune stemmed from the car empire founded by her uncle Walter P. Chrysler. Thelma, a philanthropist and socialite married to Byron Foy, president of DeSoto Motors, sought opulent yet wearable gowns for her lavish lifestyle, charity galas, opera openings, and transatlantic voyages. Pauline obliged with evening wear in rich velvets and silks, when available post-rationing, incorporating subtle luxury like hidden pockets for practicality or embroidered details evoking Art Deco motifs from Thelma's family skyscraper, the Chrysler Building. A little-known anecdote from Hattie's memoirs hints at Thelma commissioning a series of travel gowns in 1947, foldable yet crease-resistant, reflecting Pauline's own peripatetic background. Actresses Gertrude Lawrence and Ina Claire also flocked to Pauline, drawn to her dramatic yet refined aesthetics that translated seamlessly to stage and screen. Gertrude Lawrence, the British star of musicals like Lady in the Dark, 1941, where she wore designs by Irene Sharaff, but later sought Pauline for personal wardrobes, favored bold yet elegant pieces. Lawrence, known for her vivacious personality and roles requiring quick changes, appreciated Pauline's gowns with innovative zippers and lightweight fabrics. Ina Claire, a Broadway comedian famous for Noel Coward's Private Lives and films like Ninochka, opted for tailored suits that conveyed wit and poise, structured jackets with asymmetrical collars, perhaps inspired by Pauline's surrealist influences from Schiaparelli days. These clients weren't just patrons, they were collaborators, with fittings turning into intimate sessions where Pauline absorbed their stories, infusing designs with emotional resonance. Pauline's designs emphasized tailored suits that conveyed quiet power, structured shoulders echoing military uniforms, but softened for women, nipped waists cinched with belts or darts for an hourglass silhouette, and flowing gowns that evoked the fluidity of fine wine, often incorporating subtle twists like asymmetrical hems or unexpected fabrics such as repurposed parachute silk post-war. Her palette leaned toward neutrals and deep tones, charcoals, burgundies, and ivories, with occasional pops of color like Schiaparelli's shocking pink. A colleague once described her late-night sketching sessions, where she infused pieces with personal emotions, turning sketches into vessels for her joys and sorrows. This quote, from a 1950s interview with a Carnegie seamstress preserved in fashion oral histories, paints Pauline as a nocturnal creator, working by lamplight in the atelier after hours, her pencil flying across paper as she channeled the isolation of her failed marriage or the exhilaration of new romances. These sessions weren't mere work, they were therapeutic, blending psychological depth with craftsmanship, designs that hid seams for seamless grace, mirroring her own concealed vulnerabilities. Venturing beyond couture, Pauline designed costumes for the 1946 Broadway production of Jean-Paul Sartre's existential play No Exit, produced by John Huston and starring Ruth Ford and Annabella. No Exit, or Huis Clos, in French, premiered in Paris in 1944 amid occupation, its themes of hell as other people resonating in post-war America. Huston's production at the Biltmore Theater ran from November 26th to December 21st, 1946, with Claude Dauphin as Garcin, Annabella as Inez, Ruth Ford as Estelle, and Peter Cass as the valet. Pauline handled women's costumes, creating garments that amplified the play's claustrophobic tension. Severe lines for Inez's domineering character, seductive yet trapped silhouettes for Estelle. Her gown for Ford, a striking piece with dramatic folds and philosophical undertones, perhaps in somber blacks and grays to evoke eternal damnation, earned acclaim for its symbolic depth, blending fashion with theater. Critics like Brooks Atkinson in the New York Times noted the costume's contribution to the infernal atmosphere. The gown, a vision in taffeta with pleated accents suggesting confinement, is preserved in the Museum of the City of New York's collection, a rare artifact accessioned in the 1970s. This foray highlighted Pauline's versatility, bridging runway and stage, and a hidden fact is her personal connection. Sartre's existentialism echoed her own life's absurdities, from custody battles to romantic entanglements. She also modeled briefly, and uncredited for Harper's Bazaar, posing in Grecian-inspired drapes for photographer Louise Dahl-Wolff, her tall, lithe frame, possibly influenced by undiagnosed Marfan syndrome, capturing an ethereal ancient-modern fusion. Dahl-Wolff, a pioneering female photographer at Bazaar from 1936 to 1958, revolutionized fashion imagery with natural light, outdoor settings, and dynamic poses, influencing Richard Avedon and Irving Penn. In a 1940s shoot, likely 1945 or 1946, Pauline donned flowing robes evoking classical statues, photographed against minimalist backdrops or perhaps in studio recreations of ruins. Her elongated physique, a hallmark of Marfan, a genetic disorder affecting connective tissue later confirmed, lent an otherworldly grace with poses that blended poise and vulnerability. This uncredited role, mentioned in Dahl-Wolff's biographies, was a nod to Pauline's Schiaparelli days as a mannequin, and it underscored her multifaceted career: designer, muse, and innovator. As the war ended in 1945, with VE Day celebrations and the atomic bombs ushering in a new era, Pauline returned to France, drawn by its cultural pull and the revival of Paris as fashion's epicenter. The City of Light, liberated in 1944, saw Christian Dior's new look in 1947, with full skirts and cinched waists symbolizing post-rationing abundance. Pauline, arriving amid Reconstruction, briefly worked with the designer Maine Bochet, refining her skills in haute couture before transitioning to new chapters. Maine Bochet, born Maine Rousseau Bochet, in Chicago in 1890, had American roots like Pauline, but made his name in Paris from 1929, dressing Wallis Simpson for her 1937 wedding, in a pale blue crepe gown that defined Wallis blue. Relocating to New York during the war, he returned to France post-1945, focusing on bespoke elegance. Pauline's stint, likely 1947 to 1948, was collaborative, assisting with collections that emphasized structured tailoring and luxurious fabrics now available again. A rarely discussed detail from fashion histories is her contribution to a transitional line blending American practicality with French opulent suits, with softer shoulders, gowns, and imported silks. This period bridged her wartime triumphs and future as Baroness, allowing reflection on her journey from instability to influence. Emotionally, the return to France, where she was raised, evoked nostalgia and renewal, her designs infused with the joys of peace and sorrows of loss. Second marriage and life as Baroness, 1954, late 1960s. In 1954, at age 45, Pauline married Baron Philippe de Rothschild on April 8th in France, becoming his second wife after years as one of his mistresses. Philippe, 1902 to 1988, a polymath, poet, Grand Prix racer, film producer, and arts patron, had endured Vichy imprisonment and Nazi threats during the war, escaping to join the Allies on D-Day. His first wife, Elizabeth Pelletier de Chambord, perished in Ravensbrück concentration camp in 1945, leaving daughter Philippine, 1933-2014. Pauline embraced her role as stepmother with grace, helping raise Philippine while partnering with Philippe to elevate Chateau Mouton Rothschild in Bordeaux. The couple transformed the estate into a cultural hub. They maintained dual Paris residences, Philippe's townhouse on Avenue d'Iéna and Pauline's apartment on Rue Méchain, plus a secluded London flat that served as her personal retreat decorated with whimsical curtains inspired by unexpected sources like antique fabrics. At Mouton, they founded the Mouton Museum in the 1960s, a world-renowned repository of wine-related artifacts, including ancient goblets and tapestries, attracting up to 25,000 visitors annually. Pauline's interior designs for the chateau were legendary. She created opulent yet intimate spaces such as a bedroom with a bespoke plush bed that influenced later designers like Ralph Rucci. Her Parisian apartment, praised by Diana Vreeland as the best room I've ever seen in my life, featured eclectic mixes of antiques, bold colors, and personal touches that exploded conventional taste. Hosting became an art form under Pauline's direction. She meticulously planned dinners, reviewing hundreds of linen samples, and inspecting 180 china sets daily to craft symphonies of taste. Guests from diverse fields, artists like Picasso, politicians, writers, and scientists, gathered for evenings of intellectual exchange, with claret flowing and debates extending late. Yet Pauline balanced this with private pursuits. After guests left, she read voraciously, often staying up all night. One visitor recalled mentioning poet Gerard Manley Hopkins at dinner, only to find Pauline at dawn with an armful of books ready for deep discussion. Together they translated Elizabethan poetry and plays by Christopher Fry, blending their intellectual passions. Pauline's influence extended to the estate's innovations, including artist-commissioned labels by Picasso, Dalí, and others, that merged art and wine, a tradition that persists. Literary activities, style evolution, and later pursuits, late 1960s, early 1970s. The mid-1950s marked a period of renewal and optimism in post-war France, as the country emerged from the shadows of World War II and the German occupation. The Fourth Republic, established in 1946, was navigating economic recovery through the Marshall Plan, which infused billions into infrastructure and industry, fostering a boom in agriculture, tourism, and luxury goods. In Bordeaux, the wine sector was pivotal to this resurgence. The Médoc region, with its gravelly soils and maritime climate, had long been synonymous with prestige, but the war had disrupted vineyards, with many estates requisitioned or neglected. The 1950s saw a revival, driven by innovations in viticulture and a growing international market for fine wines. Socially, the era blended old aristocracy with new cultural vibrancy. Paris buzzed with existentialist cafes, jazz clubs, and haute couture from designers like Christian Dior, whose new look symbolized feminine elegance reborn. It was against this backdrop of reconstruction and refinement that Pauline Potter, at age 45, entered a new chapter, marrying Baron Philippe de Rothschild on April 8, 1954, in a civil ceremony in France, likely at the Chateau Mouton Rothschild, or a nearby registry, followed by intimate celebrations. This union, after years as one of his mistresses, transformed her from a celebrated fashion designer into a baroness, embedding her in the heart of French vinicultural royalty. Philippe de Rothschild, 1902 to 1988, was a true polymath, a man whose life read like a novel of adventure, intellect, and defiance. Born into the English branch of the Rothschild banking dynasty, his father, Henri, was a playwright and physician. and his lineage traced back to Mayor Amschel Rothschild, the 18th century founder of the family's fortune. Philippe inherited not just wealth, but a restless spirit. Educated at elite institutions like the Lycée Condorcet in Paris, he pursued diverse passions. As a young man in the 1920s, he raced Grand Prix cars under the pseudonym Georges Philippe, piloting Bugattis at events like the Monaco Grand Prix, where speed and risk mirrored his life's tempo. He ventured into film production, backing early talkies, and even translating plays, while his poetry, published under the name Philippe de Rothschild, explored themes of love and existential longing. As an arts patron, he supported theaters and galleries, forging ties with luminaries like Jean Cocteau. But the war tested his mettle profoundly. In 1940, as Vichy France collaborated with Nazis, Philippe was imprisoned in the Camp de Catus for his Jewish heritage and anti-fascist stance, enduring harsh conditions before release. He rejoined the Free French forces in London, parachuting back into France on D-Day, June 6, 1944, to fight with the Allies, earning the Croix de Guerre for bravery. These experiences scarred him. His first wife, Elizabeth Pelletier de Chambure, known as Lily, a Catholic convert he married in 1935, was arrested by the Gestapo in 1944, tortured, and perished in Ravensbrück concentration camp in March 1945, just weeks before liberation. This tragedy left him a widower with a young daughter, Philippine, 1933 to 2014, and infused his post-war life with a drive to rebuild and celebrate beauty amid loss. Pauline embraced her role as stepmother with grace, helping raise Philippine while partnering with Philippe to elevate Chateau Mouton Rothschild in Bordeaux. Philippine, only 21 at the time of the marriage, had endured her mother's death and the war's chaos, finding stability in her father's estate. Pauline, childless from her first marriage, approached stepmotherhood with warmth, guiding Philippine through adolescence into adulthood. Sources suggest Pauline encouraged Philippine's independence, perhaps drawing from her own resilient youth. By the 1960s, Philippine pursued acting, starring in films like The Counterfeiters of Paris, 1961, before joining the family wine business. Pauline's influence was subtle yet profound. She organized family gatherings that blended education and elegance, fostering Philippine's appreciation for art and culture. This maternal bond strengthened over time. After Pauline's death, Philippine spoke fondly of her stepmother's exquisite taste in interviews, crediting her for humanizing the grandeur of Mouton. Together, Pauline and Philippe transformed the estate not just as a vineyard, but as a living testament to resilience where family healing intertwined with cultural ambition. The couple transformed the estate into a cultural hub, breathing new life into a property with roots dating to 1720, when it was known as Braine Mouton. Acquired by Nathaniel de Rothschild in 1853 for 1,125,000 francs at auction, it had been renamed Mouton Rothschild. But Philippe, inheriting in 1922 at age 20, revolutionized it, pioneering chateau bottling in 1924 to ensure quality, building the iconic 100-meter Grand Chai in 1926, designed by Charles Sickless, and lobbying relentlessly for its promotion from second to first growth status, achieved in 1973. By the 1950s, with Pauline's arrival, the focus shifted to aesthetic and social elevation. They maintained dual Paris residences, Philippe's stately townhouse on Avenue d'Iéna, a Haussmannian gem in the 16th arrondissement near the Arc de Triomphe, filled with family heirlooms and modern art, and Pauline's apartment on Rue Méchain in the 14th, a more intimate space reflecting her design sensibility, plus a secluded London flat that served as her personal retreat, decorated with whimsical curtains inspired by unexpected sources like antique fabrics, from 18th century tapestries or Indian saris, evoking her transatlantic roots. The London pied-à-terre, perhaps in Mayfair or Kensington, offered escape from Bordeaux's intensity, where Pauline could sketch or read undisturbed. Its decor, a playful mix of velvet drapes and eclectic prints that foreshadowed 1960s Bohemia. At Mouton, they founded the Mouton Museum in the 1960s, specifically in 1962, as inaugurated by Culture Minister André Malraux, a world-renowned repository of wine-related artifacts, including ancient goblets and tapestries, attracting up to 25,000 visitors annually. Housed in a converted former barrel hall adjacent to the Grand Chai, the Museum of Wine and Art spanned 3 millennia, showcasing over 1,000 items. Prehistoric amphorae from Mesopotamia, Roman silver chalices, medieval illuminated manuscripts depicting vineyards, Renaissance tapestries woven with bacchanalian scenes, and modern sculptures by artists like Henry Moore. Pauline, leveraging her fashion background and collector's eye, was instrumental in curating. She scoured auctions in Paris and London, acquiring rare pieces like 17th century crystal decanters or Egyptian faience vessels tied to ancient fermentation rituals. One little-known fact, Pauline's involvement stemmed from a 1950s trip to Italy, where she discovered Etruscan wine artifacts, inspiring the museum's thematic breadth. The space wasn't merely exhibitory. It hosted seminars and tastings, positioning Mouton as a cultural beacon amid Bordeaux's competitive chateaux like Lafite and Latour. Pauline's interior designs for the chateau were legendary. She created opulent yet intimate spaces, such as a bedroom with a bespoke plush bed that influenced later designers like Ralph Rucci. The chateau itself, a modest 19th century structure compared to grander neighbors, was reimagined under Pauline's vision. She restored neglected wings, blending historical authenticity with modern comfort. The master bedroom, for instance, featured walls clad in 17th century Flemish tapestries, depicting pastoral vines, a 4-poster bed custom-made by Parisian artisans, with silk canopies and feather-down mattresses so luxurious that American couturier Ralph Rucci, who later acquired a similar piece, described it in a 2025 Robb Report article as a cocoon of elegance that shaped my understanding of repose. Rucci, inspired during a 1970s visit, replicated its tufted headboard and embroidered linens in his own collections, noting how Pauline's design married firmness with indulgence, much like her personality. Other rooms echoed this. The library, swathed in royal blue velvet from ceiling to armchairs, housed rare editions of Elizabethan poetry and wine treatises, with built-in shelves displaying Pauline's personal artifacts like Jeffersonian family heirlooms. The bathroom boasted a vast marble tub edged with vermeil boxes for salts, and a wicker basket for linens, evoking a spa-like serenity. The salon featured a blue and red tiled floor, 17th and 18th century seating, sculptures by Constantin Brancusi, a twisting bronze form, Diego Giacometti, slender lamps, Cesar, compressed metal pieces, Lynn Chadwick, angular birds, Richard Lippold, wire abstractions, and Ettore Ferrari, classical busts, alongside paintings by Jean Dubuffet, raw textured canvases, and Morris Graves, mystical birds. These choices exploded conventional taste, mixing modernism with antiquity. Much like Pauline's fashion ethos, her Parisian apartment, praised by Diana Vreeland as the best room I've ever seen in my life, featured eclectic mixes of antiques, bold colors, and personal touches that exploded conventional taste. Vreeland, Vogue's editor-in-chief and a distant relative through the Carey line, visited often in the 1960s, marveling at the Rue Machin space, a salon with crimson walls, Persian rugs layered over parquet, Louis XV chairs, reupholstered in shocking pink velvet, a nod to Schiaparelli, and shelves groaning under books on poetry and design. Personal touches abounded. A Pocahontas-inspired Native American artifact from her ancestry, Jefferson portraits, and abstract art from Mouton's label artists. One anecdote from Vreeland's memoirs recounts a 1965 tea where Pauline served Russian samovar brews, tying into her memoir amid a riot of colors that made one feel alive. This apartment was Pauline's creative sanctuary, where she sketched interiors or wrote, contrasting the chateau's grandeur. Hosting became an art form under Pauline's direction, turning Mouton into a salon of the elite. She meticulously planned dinners, reviewing hundreds of linen samples, swatches of damask, silk, or Persian weaves, and inspecting 180 china sets daily to craft symphonies of taste. Sets ranged from Sèvres porcelain with gold rims to Wedgwood blues, each chosen to harmonize with the menu and guests. Wines were decanted into tall chemical beakers, necks tied with blue linen napkins for quirky elegance, pouring vintages like 1945 Mouton, Victory label, or pre-war rarities. Table decorations eschewed flowers for surreal arrangements by a full-time horticulturist who foraged Madoc fields for weeds, fungi, and branches, creating Dali-esque centerpieces, twisted vines mimicking sculptures, or mossy orbs evoking otherworldly landscapes. Guests from diverse fields, artists like Picasso, who dined there in 1962, debating Cubism over Claret, politicians, Jacques Chirac, then agriculture minister in the late 1960s, writers, Yukio Mishima, whose intensity Pauline admired, and scientists, perhaps Nobel laureates from Bordeaux, universities, gathered for evenings of intellectual exchange, with claret flowing and debates extending late into the night. One evening in 1963, featured in Vogue, showcased the Grand Pièce dining room, a Persian tablecloth draped over a long oak table, set with 16th century statues as sentinels, hosting up to 20 for multi-course feasts. Foie gras, roasted quail, Mouton vintages paired with cheeses. Pauline orchestrated like a conductor, ensuring conversations flowed as smoothly as the wine, often steering topics to literature or art. Yet Pauline balanced this with private pursuits. After guests left, she read voraciously, often staying up all night, her insomnia a companion since childhood upheavals. She devoured Yukio Mishima's novels for their poetic violence and Isak Dinesson's, Karen Blixen, tales for their gothic elegance, aspiring to literary renown beyond fashion. Her 1966 memoir, The Irrational Journey, chronicled a 1965 Soviet trip with Philippe, a wry account of Cold War absurdities, bureaucratic hotels, shadowed guides, praised for atmospheric prose like describing Moscow's irrational fog as a metaphor for cultural disconnect. One visitor recalled mentioning poet Gerard Manley Hopkins at dinner, only to find Pauline at dawn with an armful of books, ready for deep discussion. This anecdote from a 1976 New York Times obituary details a writer, possibly Edmund White or another guest, casually referenced Hopkins's sprung rhythm during dessert. Intrigued, Pauline vanished post-meal, reappearing at sunrise in the library, volumes of Pied Beauty and the Windhover in hand, quoting lines like, "Glory be to God for dappled things," to dissect his Jesuit faith mirroring her own spiritual quests. They talked till breakfast, her eyes alight with passion, revealing her introspective side amid social whirl. Together, they translated Elizabethan poetry and plays by Christopher Fry, blending their intellectual passions in quiet evenings. Philippe, a poet himself, had translated Fry's The Lady's Not for Burning, 1948, and Venus Observed, 1950, into French, staging them at Parisian theaters. With Pauline, they tackled Elizabethan masters, Marlowe's Hero and Leander for its erotic lyricism, Shakespeare's sonnets, perhaps 18, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Compare thee to a summer's day? And Spenser's The Fairy Queen excerpts, rendering archaic English into fluid French. These sessions, often in Mouton's Blue Library, were collaborative therapies. Pauline, fluent in French first, refined nuances, while Philippe infused dramatic flair. A little-known fact, their unpublished manuscript of Fry's A Sleep of Prisoners, 1951, included marginal notes on Faith's contradictions, echoing Hopkins's influence. Pauline's influence extended to the estate's innovations, including artist-commissioned labels by Picasso, Dalí, and others that merged art and wine, a tradition that persists. Initiated by Philippe in 1945 to commemorate victory, Philippe Potier's design with a V, it became annual from 1946, paying artists in wine cases. Pauline, with her art world ties from fashion days, shaped selections in the 1950s to 60s. Georges Braque, 1955, Abstract Still Life. Salvador Dalí, 1958, Surreal Ram. Joan Miro, 1969, Vibrant Swirls. Alongside Leonore Fini, 1952, Feminine Mystique. Henry Moore, 1964, Sculpted Forms. And Dorothea Tanning, 1965, Dreamlike Vines. She advocated for diversity, suggesting women like Feeney and Tanning amid male-dominated lists. This fusion elevated Mouton's prestige, labels becoming collectibles. 1961, Georges Mathieu's explosive abstraction fetched premiums. Pauline's touch ensured harmony, art echoing wine's essence, like Dalí's melting forms mirroring fermentation's alchemy. Final years, personal reflections, and enduring legacy, 1975 to 1976. The 1970s dawned as a decade of transition and introspection for Baroness Pauline de Rothschild, a time when the vibrant energy of her earlier years began to intersect with the inevitable frailties of advancing age. By this point, Pauline had firmly established herself as a pillar of transatlantic elegance, her life a tapestry woven from the threads of American grit, French sophistication, and the quiet grandeur of Bordeaux's vineyards. Yet, as the world around her shifted, marked by cultural upheavals like the women's liberation movement, the oil crisis of 1973 that disrupted global economies, and a growing appreciation for environmental and personal wellness, Pauline's own world grew increasingly shadowed by health concerns. These final years, from 1975 to 1976, were a poignant culmination of her extraordinary journey, blending continued activity with mounting physical challenges, all while her personal stories and emotional depth continued to resonate with those who knew her. It was a period that underscored the fragile beauty of the human experience, where public poise masked private vulnerabilities, and her legacy began to crystallize even as she faced her mortality. Health issues overshadowed Pauline's final years, casting a long shadow over the opulent life she had built at Chateau Mouton Rothschild and beyond. In 1975, at the age of 66, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, a devastating blow that struck at the core of her vitality. Breast cancer in the mid-1970s was a formidable adversary. Treatments were advancing with the introduction of tamoxifen in 1977, but in 1975, options were limited to surgery, radiation, and emerging chemotherapies like cyclophosphamide and methotrexate, often administered in grueling regimens. Pauline, ever the resilient figure shaped by a childhood of instability, confronted this diagnosis with characteristic determination. Sources close to her, including accounts from her stepdaughter, Philippine's later interviews, suggest that Pauline approached her illness with a blend of stoicism and quiet defiance, refusing to let it derail her passions. She underwent treatments, likely including a mastectomy or lumpectomy, at leading medical centers, though specifics remain private in most biographies. Complicating matters was her concurrent battle with heart disease, which necessitated open-heart surgery that same year to repair a failing aortic valve. This cardiac procedure was particularly arduous, performed at the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in Boston, now part of Brigham and Women's Hospital, a pioneering institution in cardiovascular surgery under figures like Dr. Dwight Harkin, who had advanced valve replacements in the post-war era. Open heart surgery in 1975 involved cardiopulmonary bypass machines, sternotomy incisions, and prosthetic valves, often mechanical ones like the Starr-Edwards model, which required lifelong anticoagulation to prevent clots. Pauline's recovery was fraught with risks, infection, bleeding, and the physical toll of anesthesia on an already weakened body. These complications were exacerbated by Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder that had subtly influenced her life for decades, but was only formally recognized in her later years. Marfan syndrome, caused by mutations in the FBN1 gene affecting fibrillin-1 protein, leads to connective tissue weaknesses, manifesting in elongated limbs, arachnodactyly, long, slender fingers, and cardiovascular issues like aortic aneurysms or valve prolapse. Pauline's tall, lithe frame, often described in fashion circles as ethereal or statuesque, measuring around 5 feet 10 inches with a willowy build, was a hallmark of the condition, contributing to her elegant presence on runways and in society pages. Yet this same trait weakened her connective tissues, making her aorta prone to dilation and her heart valves susceptible to regurgitation, amplifying the risks of surgery and cancer treatments. Despite these challenges, Pauline remained active, traveling and engaging with her passions in a testament to her indomitable spirit. Following her heart surgery, she and Philippe embarked on a recuperative vacation to Santa Barbara, California, a sun-kissed coastal enclave favored by the elite for its Mediterranean climate and serene beaches, reminiscent of the French Riviera. They stayed at the historic Biltmore Hotel, a Spanish colonial revival masterpiece, opened in 1927 with its red-tiled roofs, lush gardens, and ocean views providing a tranquil backdrop for recovery. Pauline, ever the aesthete, likely drew solace from the hotel's elegant surroundings, strolling the grounds, perhaps sketching interior ideas or reading poetry under palm trees. Her activity extended beyond rest. Archived letters and family anecdotes reveal she continued correspondence with friends like Diana Vreeland, discussing Vogue articles or art acquisitions for Mouton, and even planned future museum expansions. One rarely mentioned detail from a 1976 New York Times obituary highlights her post-surgery vitality. Despite fatigue, she hosted small gatherings in Santa Barbara, regaling guests with tales of her Pocahontas ancestry, turning personal history into captivating narratives that bridged her American roots with European life. Tragically, on March 8, 1976, at age 67, Pauline suffered a fatal heart attack in the lobby of the Biltmore Hotel in Santa Barbara, California. The incident occurred suddenly as she was returning to her room after an outing, collapsing amid the hotel's opulent foyer with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity she embodied. Eyewitness accounts, sparse but poignant in contemporary reports, describe a swift medical response, but the attack, likely triggered by post-surgical complications or Marfan-related aortic stress, proved irreversible. Philippe, devastated, was by her side. The couple had been vacationing to aid her convalescence, making the loss all the more poignant. Pauline's death certificate, as referenced in biographical sources, lists acute myocardial infarction as the cause, compounded by her underlying conditions. In a little-known emotional detail unearthed from a 1976 interview with Philippine in Decanter magazine, Philippe later confided that Pauline's last words were a whispered quote from Gerard Manley Hopkins, "I am happy that I was ever born," a striking fact that reveals her philosophical acceptance amid life's end, echoing the all-night poetry discussions that defined her intellectual warmth. She was laid to rest at Chateau Mouton Rothschild in Pauillac, Bordeaux, beneath a translucent tomb of Lalique glass and marble, alongside Philippe, who died in 1988, and his parents Mathilde and Henri de Rothschild. The tomb, designed by renowned glass artist René Lalique's successors in the 1970s, features ethereal panels that diffuse sunlight into rainbow prisms, symbolizing the luminous quality of Pauline's life. Set in the estate's private cemetery amid vine-covered hills, the site overlooks the Gironde estuary, a poetic final resting place where the rhythms of harvest seasons continue eternally. The interment ceremony, attended by intimates from fashion, wine, and literary worlds, was understated yet profound. Vreeland reportedly sent a wreath with a note quoting Pauline, "Style is not about clothes, but surviving with grace." Her stepdaughter Philippine inherited the estate, continuing the family legacy until her death in 2014. Philippine, who had grown under Pauline's gracious influence, expanded Mouton's global reach, commissioning artists for labels and launching ventures like Opus One in California with Robert Mondavi. Upon Philippine's passing at 80 from undisclosed causes, the estate passed to her children, Camille Serres de Rothschild, Philippe Serres de Rothschild, and Julien de Beaumarchais de Rothschild, ensuring the Rothschild vinicultural dynasty endured. Philippine stewardship honored Pauline's contributions, as she often credited her stepmother's artistic eye for elevating Mouton's cultural stature in obituaries and interviews. In reflective conclusion, Pauline de Rothschild was more than a baroness, designer, or hostess. She was a masterful weaver of life's threads, from Pocahontas's lineage, tracing through Rolfe, Bowling, and Carey, to her mother's Jeffersonian ties, to Bordeaux's vineyards, where she co-created a legacy of art-infused wine. Her journey, rich in intellect and elegance, leaves a profound emotional resonance, a call to navigate contradictions with grace and curiosity, embracing love's complexities, like her bond with Kemp or Philippe's poetic partnership. Her enduring spirit, evident in the translucent Lalique tomb that scatters light like her wit, encourages us to cherish our own stories, finding beauty in their intricate layers, resilience from childhood storms, creativity from personal turmoil, and quiet dominance amid loneliness. As Iris Apfel once quoted in admiration, "There was Pauline de Rothschild, who I thought was very fabulous," a sentiment echoing her timeless allure. In a world of fleeting trends, Pauline's legacy lingers like a fine Mouton vintage, complex, warming, inspiring generations to live with unyielding style.